Old couple's house. When I was in junior high school, my house caught fire. We lost our house in the fire, but because of my father's business, we had to find a house in the same neighborhood. Until we found a new house, we had to rent a room at the house diagonally in front of ours. The house was owned by a couple who died of old age one after another about a year ago. Originally, the house was supposed to be occupied by the bereaved family, but the son and his wife had a house in the suburbs, and they had no intention to move into the old couple's house or to rent it to others. Of course we, who lived diagonally across the street, knew the elderly couple and the condition of their house. That is why we were grateful for the offer of their son and daughter-in-law to rent us their house in such a situation, and we moved into the house with a sense of gratitude. However, when we entered the house for the first time, our family felt a little perplexed. The house had lost its owner a year ago, yet all the household goods were still there, and nothing had been disposed of. The family came once a month to clean the house, and the house was kept in such a state that the old couple's teacups were placed on the kotatsu, as if it was winter. It was as if it was a lie that the old couple had passed away and were no longer in this world. It was strange that there was a strange and vivid sense of life in a house that was supposed to be uninhabited. Our family has only the bare necessities as we were originally burned out in the fire. We will be living for the time being while borrowing all of the dishes and other items from this house. On the first day we moved into this house, I was left alone to take care of the house in the rush of moving. I was left alone in the living room, looking around the rooms, when I became interested in the altar that was set up in the room. My family is not religious, so we do not have a Buddhist altar, but I had seen and heard that people in homes with a Buddhist altar had a custom of praying at it. I thought, since I am a guest in this house, shouldn't I at least join my hands to the altar? Even as a child, I thought so. I immediately lit incense and went to the altar to join my hands. But as the smell of incense rose, I began to feel strangely unsettled. I felt something watching me. I could feel the presence of someone staring at me from the altar. The look was cold, and it was clearly a look of disapproval. I suddenly became frightened and moved to the center of the living room to escape from the Buddhist altar. The smell of incense filled the room, creating a still, unpleasant atmosphere. I thought to myself, is there anything I can do to help? I was anxious to get something moving. What caught my eye was an old pillar clock. It was the spiral wound clock with a pendulum that often appears in dramas set in the early Showa period. It had long since stopped working and had become a mere objet d'art. However, it was not battery-powered, but rather a spiral wound watch. I decided to at least make an effort to move it if it would work as long as I winded the spiral. I moved the shibudai to the side of the pillar, got on it, took off the clock, and tried winding the screw twice. As soon as I did that, it started making a very loud noise. The sound was very gloomy, and I was even more frightened than I already was. I had to do something to stop it. Impatiently, I just kept turning the second hand in the dark. I heard a noise right next to my ear. I looked over to see that somehow, the owner of this house, my grandfather's portrait, had been removed from the duckway and was swinging, hanging in midair by a string. The groove in the kamoy is quite deep, and it seemed unnatural that the picture, which had been hung there as if it were to be inserted into the groove, should come off. I was already half crying with fear, but I put the clock back on and put Grandpa's shadow back on its stand, which was shaking a lot. But at that moment, next thing I know, my grandma's remains were off and swinging wildly in front of my eyes. I didn't touch anything, so why? Me fixing my grandma's remains. Grandpa's remains have come off again. It seems as if the image was intentionally dropped from the duckway. And the pillar clock suddenly started ringing again. I feared that the old couple might be angry at us for entering their house. I was beginning to fear that the old couple might be angry with us for entering their house. This all happened when I was alone. During this fire, the move-in, and all the other problems that were happening, I thought, Maybe the two people who died in this house are still here as ghosts, and they are furious about our intrusion. I would not only be ridiculed, but I might even be lectured if I told my parents. I decided to keep quiet and not tell anyone about the incident. That night, I went to bed at home for the first time. And perhaps because the daytime events had cast a shadow over my feelings, I suddenly found myself unable to move as I had a hard time falling asleep. I was terrified because I could not move my body at all. At that moment, I heard a slow stomping sound coming from the hallway separated by a single sliding door at my bedside. Never in a hurry, his slow gait echoed off the wooden flooring of the corridor. The gait made one imagine the slow tempo of the old man's walk. 5 family members, including myself, must be sleeping in this house at this time, but the footsteps do not apply to anyone else, given the circumstances or otherwise. Get out of this house as soon as possible. It was as if the old couple was saying so. Why am I the only one who feels this way? The next morning, as I looked at this house in the sunlight, I sighed. I had hoped that in the morning I would forget all about yesterday's events and feel renewed. But I was wrong. The house was filled with a gloomy atmosphere. Compared to the rest of the family, who spent most of their time outside the house, I, a junior high school student, came home early and spent most of my time inside the house by myself. The mysterious phenomena in the house often occurred when I was alone, as if they were targeting me. Suddenly, a pillar clock would ring without any reason. The remains of an elderly couple that would make noise and fall off no matter how hard I tried to put it back on. Every night I became motionless as if someone was holding me down, and every time I did so, I would hear them pacing the hallway. However, as a practical matter, it was impossible for us to leave here without a home. In fact, my parents are now spending their days visiting real estate agencies in between jobs in order to decide on their next residence. I reminded them to explain the horror stories they encounter every night. I reminded myself to explain to them every night when I was shackled, your stay in this house is only temporary. We will be leaving soon, so please, let us stay here for a while. But the spirits of the old couple did not seem to understand this. As if frustrated by our unwillingness to leave no matter how much we harassed them, we would experience monstrous phenomena on a daily basis. Then one day, I could no longer move my body as usual and I heard something walking down the hallway. I was shaking with fear, which I could not get used to no matter how long it took, even though it happened every night, and that day the sound of footsteps in the hallway came to a halt in front of my room. I heard the scrape of a sliding door opening. I was so scared that I desperately closed my eyes. At that moment, I felt a shock in my chest. Suddenly, I felt pressure in my chest, and I began to suffer. It was as if there was a person on top of me. I was so distressed that I opened my eyes and saw the back of an old lady wearing a white kimono. I was so glad that I was not facing the front. I seemed to have fainted while thinking that. The next day, I finally talked to my parents about it. Isn't this house a little strange? My mother's face clouded over at my words. She said, yes, it is. Lately, the pillar clock has been ticking for no reason, and pictures have been falling out of the house. The spirits of the old couple thought, it won't do any good to harass me alone. Did the spirits of the old couple think so? A few days later, our family moved to another place because we could not stay in someone's house forever. The next house was also a temporary residence, so to speak, with no intention of living there permanently, so in hindsight, my parents may have felt something for that house. The old couple's house was torn down a few years later. I have no particular memory of them before their death. They were just 2 people who lived in the neighborhood, and that was about it. I think they probably thought of me only that way, and we were just casual neighbors. I wonder if that is why they were so angry at us and our family for suddenly coming over. I don't know. Sorry for the lack of punchline. This is the end of this story. Thank you for listening to the end.